The final chapter in the story of Anne Boleyn when she was executed on the 19th of May. At dawn on the morning of the 19th of May 1536, Anne heard mass in her chambers. At 8 o'clock, the Constable of the Tower, Sir William Kingston, came and got Anne. I've stood on the curtain wall at the Tower of London and I'm looking over to where the private apartments that were built for Anne Boleyn would have once stood, where she stayed the night before her coronation and where she was brought in May 1536 prior to her trial at the Great Hall or King's Hall here, and finally her execution on the other side of the White Tower, and her burial in St Peter ad Vincula there on the left in the background. The King's Hall or Great Hall was somewhere in front of me now. We would have been probably similar height to its roof had it still been here. And Anne Boleyn would have walked to her execution from her private apartments, past the Great Hall, and then up through a gate which no longer exists. You can just see the foundations of it there, Cold Harbour Gate. She would have walked up through that gate to the specially erected scaffold on the opposite side of the White Tower. If you visited the tower or you've seen pictures, you will probably have seen this glass pillow memorial. Now, this is not the site of Anne's scaffold, as we've just seen, but what is interesting, and I thought you might like, is I have found this out of a tour guide for the Tower of London from 1973, and you can quite clearly see that around the point where the glass pillow memorial now is, it actually says site of block. Anne had understandably been hysterical at times during her incarceration in the Tower of London, but on the day of her execution, she was calm and collected and made this speech. Good Christian people, I have not come here to preach a sermon. I have come here to die. For according to the law and by the law I am judged to die, and therefore I will speak nothing against it. I am come hither to accuse no man, nor to speak of what whereof I am accused and condemned to die. But I pray God save the King, and send him long to reign over you. For a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never. And to me he was ever a good, a gentle, and sovereign lord. And if any person will meddle of my cause, I require them to judge the best. And thus I take my leave of the world and of you all, and I heartily desire you all to pray for me. Anne had died at the hands of the Calais swordsman, and we don't know the name of this man. We don't actually know who he was, but he was obviously known for his skill. Anne's head came off in one strike. She would have been knelt up, so not on a block, and the sword swung to take her head off. So very quick for Anne, mercifully. Anne's body was taken to St Peter ad Vincula and buried without ceremony inside the chapel, and perhaps people didn't actually think this was going to actually happen because there was no coffin prepared for her. Her body and severed head were placed inside a box which had been used to store bows. The grave markings that you see today within the chapel are actually 18th century. The chapel was found to be rather unsafe underfoot, and Queen Victoria visited here because this is actually a chapel royal. This is a chapel that belongs to the reigning monarch, and Victoria said, "This is ridiculous, we need to get this sorted." They probably weren't her words. And the bodies were exhumed and reinterred, and these paving stones now, which look very beautiful, were laid. But that wasn't the end to the story, of course. Henry VIII was actually betrothed to Jane Seymour the following day, on the 20th of May. They were married on the 30th of May, only 11 days after Anne had been executed at the hands of the Calais swordsman. Jane and Henry were married at York Place, the confiscated palace of Cardinal Wolsey, which had been confiscated, and Anne and Henry had begun building work and plans to create a massive palace, Whitehall Palace as it became. Apparently the marriage hadn't taken place immediately because of concerns over how inappropriate that might seem. Anne's fate was sealed from before even her arrest. The Calais swordsman must have been ordered before her trial, so before her being found guilty. There was no way that a message could have got to Calais, and for him to have travelled over in order for the execution to have taken place without it happening before the trial. Anne's original execution date should have been the 18th of May, the day after the men who were condemned with her for high treason because of adultery apparently with the Queen and plotting the King's death. They had all died on Tower Hill on the 17th of May. Anne was originally supposed to have her execution date on the 18th of May within the Tower walls. So it wasn't a public execution, although there was a crowd. But the scaffold wasn't ready. People who could be sympathisers towards Anne were removed from the tower. That took time. So her actual execution date then fell the day after the original planned date, and so fell on the 19th of May. Anne had been arrested on the 2nd of May and brought to the Tower of London, so she was executed on the 19th of May, only 17 days later. Historians today, I think, are generally convinced that Anne was innocent, and there are a number of pieces of evidence to demonstrate that. I've already talked about the swordsman. There was the fact that on the 13th of May, 2 days before Anne's trial, her household was broken up. And then on top of that, we have the fact that there were already rumours going around, even before Anne's arrest, that Henry was courting Jane Seymour, and his behaviour towards Jane, promising her they would marry, that Anne would be definitely found guilty, all before her trial. If you contrast that then with the events which happened to Catherine Howard in 1541-42, there's a very different timeline. It took much longer. There was actual investigation into what Catherine had been doing, and Henry was visibly upset. I hope you enjoyed going through the story of Anne Boleyn's downfall with me.